Snow fell heavy over Ashwood's old cemetery when a black soldier named Silas pulled his truck to the side of the road. His German shepherd, Valor, stirred first ears, pricked, eyes locked on a small figure shivering at the iron gates. A boy, no more than 8, in a torn blue coat, clutching a cracked photograph as if it were his last breath of family. People had passed him for 2 nights, calling him unstable, calling him broken. But when Silas knelt beside him and Valor pressed close like a living shield, the boy whispered words that froze them both. "I waited here because my daddy never came back from the war." Ashwood, Ohio, lay buried beneath a December silence, the kind of silence that pressed deep into bone and memory alike. The snow had swallowed the main streets, blurring the neon flickers of shuttered diners and casting the city into a hushed white gloom. Beyond the last row of houses, where the road bent toward the forgotten edge of town, Forest Hill Cemetery crouched like a relic of grief. Its wrought iron gates stood locked and brittle with frost, but the presence of the dead lingered on both sides of the bars. It was here that Silas Carter slowed his battered Chevy truck, his fingers tightening around the wheel as his German shepherd, Valor, stirred beside him. Silas was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of dark earth and a gaze weathered by 2 tours overseas. His hair, once thick and black, had begun to gray at the temples, though he kept it cropped close, as if discipline could still hold time at bay. He wore his old army jacket not for fashion, but because it fit in all the right places, over scars at his shoulder, along the weight of memory at his chest. The war had left him with a limp in winter and nights full of silence, but also with valor, the one constant that never faltered. Valor was 10 years old now, a black and tan German shepherd whose muzzle had silvered with age. His frame was still muscular, though his movements had grown deliberate, less bounding, more calculated. His amber eyes were sharp, carrying the kind of watchfulness that came only from surviving too much alongside a man who had seen the same. Silas often thought Valor knew what he didn't say aloud, as if the dog carried the part of his soul that had refused to harden completely. Tonight, as they passed the cemetery, Valor lifted his head suddenly, ears erect, a low sound rumbling deep in his throat. Not alarm, not fear, but recognition. "Easy, boy," Silas murmured, easing the truck closer to the curb. He trusted Valor's instincts more than his own. In Kandahar, the dog had once dragged him clear of rubble just minutes before an IED detonated. Another time, Valor had found the lost child of a villager, guiding her home through smoke and chaos. Trust was no longer a choice between them, it was their language. The headlights swept across the gates, illuminating something small and unmoving in the snow. At first glance, Silas thought it a bundle of discarded blankets, maybe trash caught in the storm. But then it shifted. His breath caught. It was a child, a boy, pale and slight, no more than 8, curled into himself as if shrinking from the world. He wore only a thin blue winter coat, frayed at the sleeves, with no gloves, no boots. His feet bare against the frozen ground. His arms clutched a wooden picture frame so tightly it seemed welded to his chest. The snow had piled across his shoulders and hair, as if the storm itself had tried to bury him. Silas cut the engine. The world went still, except for the crackle of snow against glass. Valor moved before Silas could open the door. The shepherd leapt down, landing softly in the drift, and padded toward the boy without hesitation. He didn't bark or growl. Instead, he lowered himself beside the child, curling against his side, pressing warmth into him with the gentle insistence of loyalty. The boy flinched at first, then leaned unconsciously toward the heat Valor gave, his trembling easing just slightly. Silas approached, boots crunching in the snow, each breath visible in the frigid night. He knelt down, lowering himself to the boy's eye level. "Hey there, son!" His voice deep and steady, carrying the gentleness of someone who had learned how easily broken things could be. "You hurt? You need help?" The boy lifted his head just enough for Silas to see his face cheeks raw from wind, lips cracked and bluish, eyes swollen red from crying. His hair was light brown, matted against his forehead, and his skin, pale as glass, looked stretched thin by hunger. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he rocked forward slightly, arms still locked around the picture frame. "What's your name?" Silas asked, softening his tone. He tugged the edge of his jacket open, offering its warmth without forcing it. Valor pressed his nose gently against the boy's hand, whimpering low. The boy's voice cracked when it came, barely audible. Evan! Evan! Silas repeated, grounding the name in the air. I'm Silas. This here's Valor. He's a good boy. He won't leave you. At the sound of his name, Valor thumped his tail once, but did not move, his body steady against the boy's small frame. Evan's grip tightened on the photograph. His lips trembled. I was waiting for Daddy. But Mama left. She said she'd come back. She didn't. The words hit Silas with the sharp weight of recognition. He knew that kind of waiting, the endless ache of promises that never came true. He saw it every night in his own reflection, in the letters folded away in a drawer, in the silence left by brothers in arms who never returned. The boy's voice broke on the last word, and for a moment the only sound was the wind scouring across the headstones. Silas eased his jacket around Evan's shoulders, tucking it close. You don't need to wait here alone anymore, he said firmly, though gently. Come on, let's get you warm. Evan didn't resist, but his gaze lingered on the cemetery gate, as if still expecting a figure to step out from the shadows. Finally, his head fell against Valor's neck, and he whispered so quietly Silas almost missed it. Don't let go. Silas gathered him into his arms. The boy was too light, far too light, his bones fragile under the weight of snow and sorrow. The cracked picture frame remained wedged between them, Evan refusing to release it. Valor padded ahead, his tracks a steady guide through the snow back to the truck. As Silas settled Evan into the passenger seat, wrapping the jacket tighter around him, he couldn't help but glance at the photograph through the broken glass. A man in military uniform looked back, strong jaw, calm eyes, holding an infant girl. Recognition stirred in Silas, though the memory hovered just out of reach, like smoke refusing to settle. He started the engine, the heater coughing into life. Evan's head lolled against his arm, his eyes fluttering with exhaustion. Valor climbed onto the seat behind, his head lowering onto Evan's lap, anchoring him with presence. The boy's whisper came again, soft, fragile, like prayer. Daddy, where are you? I'm so cold. Silas drove into the storm, snow lashing against the windshield, the road ahead swallowed in white. Yet within the cab of the old truck, warmth flickered. A soldier, a boy, and a dog bound by a moment at the gates of the forgotten dead. And though Silas did not yet know it, this was the night everything began to change. The road home wound narrow and dark through the skeletal woods at the edge of Ashwood. Snow continued to fall, each flake catching in the beams of Silas's headlights like sparks in the night. Inside the cab of the Chevy, warmth finally seeped in from the heater, though it had to fight against the frost that clung stubbornly to the windows. Evan sat slumped in the passenger seat, Silas's heavy army coat wrapped around his shoulders like armor. His eyelids fluttered, the cracked photograph still pressed tight against his chest, as though it were the only anchor left to hold him steady in the world. Valor, curled at Evan's feet, lifted his head now and then to glance at Silas with those amber eyes that seemed to ask what they both already knew. What now? Silas kept his gaze on the road, but inside recognition gnawed at him. He had seen the man in the photograph before. Captain Marcus Hale Tall, commanding, steady under fire, wasn't just another officer from his past. Marcus had been the one who pulled Silas out of a collapsed compound during a night raid gone wrong. His strength and calm, the only thing that kept Silas breathing until dawn. Marcus had been the kind of soldier who wrote letters home with jokes scribbled in the margins, the kind who believed in coming back alive. Yet the war had other plans. Silas remembered the folded flag handed to a woman at a graveside, remembered standing stiff in his dress uniform while the bugle played. Now here was Marcus's son, abandoned in the cold, waiting for a father who could never return. The cabin appeared at last through the trees, a modest wooden structure hunched beneath a sagging roof of snow. The windows were dark, save for a faint glow from the stove chimney, a remnant of the fire Silas had left that morning. He parked, stepped out, and carefully lifted Evan into his arms. The boy stirred faintly, murmuring in sleep, "Daddy, I'm so cold." The words cut deep, but Silas only tightened the coat around him. Valor leapt down, circling once before pacing toward the door as if to urge them inside. The interior of the cabin greeted them with the smell of pine and iron stove smoke. The floorboards groaned under Silas's boots as he carried Evan into the small bedroom at the back. The room was plain but neat, a twin bed dressed with flannel, a dresser bearing a scattering of old medals, and photographs nailed crookedly to the wall faces from a life Silas no longer touched. He laid Evan down, pulling the blanket over him. Valor stationed himself at the doorway, then shifted closer, settling at the foot of the bed, his head resting on his paws but his body angled protectively toward the boy. Silas lingered at the threshold, watching the fragile rise and fall of Evan's breathing. It was strange how quickly the silence of the cabin had shifted, from a space haunted by absence to one reshaped by this small presence. He turned away at last, retreating to the kitchen where the kettle whistled weakly. The cabin's kitchen was cramped faded linoleum counters, a scarred wooden table, and a single chair that always sat just a little off balance. Silas poured himself coffee and sat down heavily. The photograph haunted his mind. Marcus's steady eyes, captured forever in black and white, stared back at him through the cracks in glass. The memories pressed in like ghosts. Marcus had confided once, during a lull in the fighting, that he worried about leaving his family with nothing but stories. "A man's worth," Marcus had said, "ain't measured by medals. It's measured by what his kids remember when he's gone." Silas had laughed then, the kind of laugh meant to push back the fear, but the words had stayed. Now, staring into the storm outside his window, Silas felt the weight of them settle. Evan wasn't just some boy found at a cemetery gate. He was Marcus Hale's son, and somehow, fate had put him in Silas's hands. As the night deepened, the cabin filled with the sounds of rest. Evan murmured softly in his dreams, repeating the same fractured plea, "Daddy, don't leave." Each time Valor stirred, lifting his head, inching closer, until at last he climbed fully onto the bed, curling against the boy's side. Silas checked once before turning in, and the sight froze him. Evan clutching the photograph in one hand. Valor pressed against him like a sentinel who had chosen his post. Silas thought of all the places he had seen Valor stand guard over bunkers, over wounded men, over Silas himself, and realized the dog had made his choice again without hesitation. Morning broke pale and brittle, the sky a flat canvas of gray. Silas brewed oatmeal on the stove, slicing an apple with practiced efficiency. He had lived alone long enough that meals were never elaborate, only enough to keep going. When Evan emerged from the bedroom, still wrapped in the coat, his hair tangled and his eyes shadowed from too little sleep, Silas slid the bowl across the table. "Eat what you can," he said simply. Evan obeyed quietly, Valor sitting close by, his gaze never leaving the boy. As Evan ate in silence, Silas studied him in the new light. The boy's features carried shadows of Marcus something in the curve of his jaw, the set of his eyes. But there was more, a fragility that war and death had etched too early. Silas wanted to ask about Evan's mother, about why she had left him there, but the questions felt like knives. Instead, he asked gently, "Where'd you get that photo, son?" Evan looked down at the frame resting beside his bowl. His voice was low. "Daddy gave it to me before he left. Mama tried to throw it away once, but I kept it." The admission struck like a hammer. Silas reached out, steadying the frame with his large hand. He recognized the strength it took for a child to cling to a memory when the world told him to let go. "You did right," Silas murmured. "Some things ain't meant to be thrown away." The day passed in uneasy rhythm. Evan wandered the cabin shyly, fingers tracing the medals on the wall, whispering questions Valor seemed to understand before Silas could answer. At one point, Evan stopped before a photograph of Silas in uniform, standing with his unit in the desert. "Were you with Daddy?" he asked. Silas hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, we were brothers in arms. He saved my life." Evan pressed his hand flat against the glass, as if trying to bridge the years. "Then maybe God sent you," he whispered. Silas had no answer to that. That evening, as the snow thickened again outside, Silas sat at his desk, sifting through a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were old letters from Marcus, some still sealed, others yellowed with time. One caught his eye, a folded page with Marcus's bold handwriting, lines filled with jokes about the food, the weather, the endless sand. But at the bottom, scrawled almost as an afterthought, Marcus had written, "If anything happens to me, look out for my boy." Silas's breath caught. It was as if Marcus had known, as if this night, this boy, had been set in motion long before the snow fell on Ashwood. Silas closed the box slowly, the letter pressed against his palm like a vow. In the other room, Evan's voice echoed once more, thin and trembling in the dark. "Daddy, I'm cold." But this time, Valor answered first, a soft bark, followed by the sound of him climbing back onto the bed. The boy quieted, soothed by the weight of loyalty that would not leave. Silas leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire's glow. He had been given a second chance he never asked for. The question now was whether he was strong enough to hold it. The storm had quieted to a powdery drizzle by the time Silas stirred from his chair. The fire in the stove had burned low, throwing a weak orange glow across the cabin walls. He had barely slept, his mind replaying Marcus Hale's handwriting, the unfinished jokes in those old letters, and the way Evan clutched the photograph as though it were stitched to his chest. Valor, loyal as ever, lay at the boy's feet in the spare bedroom, ears pricked at every sound, his tail occasionally thumping the floor as if to reassure the boy, even in sleep. Morning light was gray and reluctant, filtering through the frosted window like a faint breath. Silas had just poured hot water over stale grounds when a knock sounded at the front door, brisk and purposeful. Standing there was Helen Briggs, tall and lean in a thick navy coat, her silver hair pulled back into a practical braid that brushed her shoulder. Her eyes were sharp, a steel blue that had seen too much sickness in too many kitchens where medicine ran out before hope did. Helen had grown up the daughter of a steel worker and a church pianist, had studied nursing in Cleveland, before returning to Ashwood when her parents fell ill. She was a woman shaped by necessity, no wasted words, no patience for pity, but a compassion that lived in the things she did rather than the things she said. "I heard," she said, stepping inside without hesitation. "A boy. Cemetery. Cold night like that, it spreads fast through town. You've got him here?" Silas nodded, gesturing toward the back room. "He's asleep." Helen's gaze swept the cabin, noting the lined-up boots, the photographs on the wall, the medals left untouched on a shelf. She did not comment. Instead, she set her satchel on the table and followed Silas to the bedroom. Evan blinked awake at the creak of the floorboard. He stiffened, clutching the frame tighter, until Valor shifted closer, pressing his body into the boy's side. The shepherd's amber eyes fixed on Helen, alert but not hostile, a silent warning that the boy was not to be disturbed without cause. Helen crouched low, hands open, her voice steady. "Morning, sweetheart. I'm Helen. I take care of kids when they're sick. Mind if I check your hands?" The boy looked at Silas. At his nod, Evan extended small, frost-bitten fingers. Helen rubbed warmth gently into them, inspected his cracked lips, pressed her fingers lightly against his pulse. Then she pulled off his blanket to check his bare feet. Skin raw but not destroyed. After a long moment she stood, brushing snow melt from her knees. "He's cold, malnourished," she said softly to Silas, "but not broken. Nothing time, food, and warmth can't heal. The greater wound is here." She tapped her chest. "And it won't mend easy." She looked to Valor, still stationed beside the bed. "That dog knows. Sometimes animals see what humans refuse to admit." When she left, she paused at the door, snow catching in the ridges of her braid. "Silas, someone will come. You don't just find a boy like this by accident. Be ready." Her words had barely settled in Silas's chest when, that afternoon, the crunch of tires on gravel echoed through the trees. A sheriff's cruiser came into view, dull paint dusted with frost. Sheriff Dalton Reed emerged, broad and heavy-set in his 50s, his black jacket zipped high, badge glinting with scratches that told of decades in service. His face was lined, the kind of weathering that came from squinting against sun and snow alike, and his graying hair was cut military short. Dalton had once been a soldier himself, a man who had learned obedience as survival. Now he wore law like armor. "Silas Carter," he said, extending a gloved hand, eyes sweeping the cabin, pausing at the shadow of Evan inside. "We got a report, a boy. Need to see for myself." Silas stepped aside, but Valor rose instantly, body stiff, stance blocking the boy. Dalton hesitated at the threshold, his eyes flicking down to the shepherd. "Does he bite?" "Not unless you deserve it," Silas replied flatly. Inside, Dalton produced a folder, flipping it open with thick fingers. "Name matches what you told Helen. Evan Hale. But here's the part that concerns me." He tapped the page. "Records say he's unstable, prone to delusions, dangerous behavior. Diagnosis signed off by one Monica Harrington." The name landed like a stone. Silas's jaw tightened. He remembered Monica as a woman who always walked too close to Marcus's orbit, perfume stronger than her sincerity. She had married rich once, divorced fast, and whispered about investments more than children. Marcus never trusted her. Now her name was stamped across Evan's life like a brand. "That boy isn't unstable," Silas said, voice low, steady as a drawn blade. "He's hungry, cold, abandoned. You saw him? He was at a cemetery in a snowstorm. That's not a delusion. That's neglect." Dalton shut the folder with a sigh. "I don't make the diagnoses, Carter. I enforce the system. If his mother signed him over and this Monica's got guardianship, my hands are tied." Valor growled low, stepping forward just enough for Dalton to feel the heat of his body. The sheriff raised a calming palm. "I can see where loyalty lies. I'll file my report, but you should know if she comes with papers, I have to act." After Dalton left, the sound of his cruiser fading into the pines, Silas sat heavy at his desk. The boy was sketching on scrap paper nearby, Valor at his feet, tail tapping every time Evan leaned close. Silas pulled out the battered box of Marcus's letters, his hands calloused and scarred, sifted through until one page fell free. An unsigned legal document, stamped but incomplete, warning Marcus of contested claims on his pension and property. Typed at the bottom was the name Monica Harrington. Behind it, in Marcus's hurried handwriting, a scrawl that hit Silas like a blow. "If anything happens to me, don't let her near my boy. She'll twist the truth to get what she wants." Silas closed his eyes, the paper trembling between his fingers. Marcus had known. He had seen the storm forming long before it broke. And now, years later, his son had been left in the snow, branded unstable, just so someone else could hold the keys to his inheritance. He looked across the room, Evan's head bent low over his drawing, the faint curve of a smile tugging at his lips as Valor nudged his arm. The boy sketched clumsy figures, a tall man, a dog, and a child between them, all holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Silas felt the ache of inevitability, the weight of a promise unspoken, but already carved into his chest. The storm that had settled over Ashwood refused to leave, but Silas had learned long ago that answers were rarely found in fair weather. They came in fragments, in the grit between snowflakes, in the way a dog refused to rest when something still remained unsaid. Valor had spent half the night pacing near the door, ears twitching to sounds only he could hear, until at last he sat heavily by Silas's chair, staring at him with those amber eyes that seemed to demand a decision. By dawn, Silas understood. They needed to look beyond the cabin. Marcus's warning and Dalton Reed's folder had pointed to Monica Harrington, but suspicion alone was not enough. They needed proof, something no one could deny. Silas pulled on his worn coat and boots, motioning to Evan, who was still at the table with his half-finished drawing. "I've got errands," Silas said gently. "Helen's stopping by later. She'll keep an eye on you." Evan nodded, clutching the photograph like a talisman. Valor nudged his hand once, then trotted after Silas toward the truck. The dog leapt into the passenger seat, head turned toward town as if he knew the road already. Ashwood's streets were quiet, the storefronts frosted over, their windows reflecting pale gray light. Near the corner of 2nd Street stood an old flower shop, its painted sign weathered and chipped but still legible, Pierce's Florals, since 1974. The windows were fogged, behind them the faint outline of greenery pressing against the glass. Silas parked, and Valor jumped down first, shaking snow from his coat. The bell above the door jingled as Silas pushed inside, greeted instantly by the heady scent of lilies and cinnamon. Behind the counter stood Donovan Pierce, a wiry man in his early 60s with a beard white as frost, his hair tied into a loose ponytail. His spectacles slid low on his narrow nose, and his flannel shirt was half hidden beneath a green apron dusted with pollen. Donovan had lived his whole life in Ashwood, tending flowers even as the mills closed and neighbors left. Where others hardened, he softened, believing that small acts of beauty were rebellion enough against despair. His voice when he spoke carried a dry cadence as though each word had been weighed before being released. "Well," Donovan said without looking up from trimming stems, "a ghost from the hills walks into my shop. Didn't think I'd see Silas Carter before spring thaw." Silas managed a faint smile. "I need a favor, Don." Donovan finally lifted his gaze, pale blue eyes narrowing behind the round frames. "This isn't about roses. It's about the cameras you've got out front. Night of the storm, near the cemetery gate." For a long moment, Donovan studied him. Then, without another word, he gestured toward the back room. They passed shelves stacked with ribbon boxes, receipts, and a cat curled lazily on an overturned crate. On the desk sat an aging laptop connected to an external hard drive. Donovan plugged it in, fingers slow but deliberate. "Motion activated," he explained. "Runs from dusk till dawn. I keep the footage for a week in case some fool tags my windows again." The grainy video flickered to life on the screen, time stamped with the storm's night. At 11:45 p.m., a dark SUV slid into frame, tires crunching half onto the sidewalk. The driver door opened. A woman stepped out, tall and lean, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail under the hood of her coat. Even blurred by snow, her movements were unmistakably deliberate. Monica Harrington. They watched as she opened the back door, tugging a small figure out into the snow oven, stumbling in his thin blue coat. Monica knelt briefly, pressing something into his arms, her lips moving close to his ear. Then she turned, walking back to the SUV without a glance behind. The boy remained small and fragile before the cemetery gate. The car pulled away, swallowed by the storm. Donovan paused the footage. "That's abandonment." "Play the audio," Silas said. Donovan hesitated, then adjusted the feed. From the small shop microphone came Monica's voice, faint but clear. "Stay quiet. If they think you're crazy, they'll never give you what's his." Valor let out a growl, low and haunted, the kind Silas had only heard once before, when the dog had found a soldier dying alone in the desert. Silas reached down, resting a hand on Valor's back. The shepherd's body quivered, ears flat, eyes fixed on the frozen image of the screen. "Copy it," Silas said quietly. Donovan inserted a USB drive, transferred the file, and handed it over. "You're not just tugging weeds, Carter," Donovan murmured. "You're about to pull up roots that go deeper than you think." Back at the cabin, Silas placed the drive beside Marcus's letter on the desk. The evidence was no longer a whisper, no longer just Marcus's warning scrawled in ink. It was real, tangible, proof that Monica had left Evan in the snow and branded him unstable to claim what she wanted. He sat there staring at both the letter and the drive when another knock came at the door. This time it was Rachel Monroe, a young attorney from Cleveland who had recently returned to Ashwood to care for her aging father. She was in her early 30s with chestnut curls tucked under a navy coat, her face freckled and open yet edged with determination. Rachel had a reputation for taking difficult cases pro bono, believing the law should be a shield, not a weapon. Her father had once served alongside Marcus, and when she heard whispers of Evan's plight at the church, she had come without hesitation. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, stepping inside, stomping snow from her boots. "I heard about the boy, and the woman tied to him. I'd like to help." Silas studied her a long moment. She was younger, but her gaze did not waver. "Why?" Rachel smiled faintly, setting her briefcase on the table. "Because I know how the system works when someone with money and ambition wants control. They twist papers, buy voices, drown truth in noise. And because I saw Valor with the boy just now, that kind of loyalty is testimony no court should ignore." Evan peeked from the hallway, photograph still in hand. Valor moved instantly, placing himself between the boy and the stranger, until Silas gestured calm. Rachel crouched low, offering a smile. Hi, Evan. My name's Rachel. I'm here to help make sure no one takes you somewhere you don't want to go. The boy hesitated, then looked at Valor. When the shepherd sat down calmly, Evan stepped forward just enough to nod. Later, when the boy returned to his drawing, Rachel sat with Silas by the fire, examining both Marcus's letter and the USB drive. Her brow furrowed as she read the handwriting, then relaxed with certainty. This is more than enough to raise an injunction, she said. It proves abandonment. It ties Monica to fraud. And combined with Marcus's letter, it sets intent. Courts can't ignore this. Silas leaned back, exhaustion pulling at him. But for the first time since that night at the cemetery, he felt the shape of a path forward. Not easy, not simple, but possible. Valor rested his head on Evan's lap, the boy tracing absent circles behind his ears. In that small cabin, amidst the storm and the silence, hope flickered like the firelight, fragile but alive. The courthouse of Ashwood stood like a relic from another century, its red brick walls and arched windows darkened by decades of weather, the bell tower above long rusted silent. On the morning of the hearing, the heavy snow had not deterred the town. By 9 o'clock, the benches inside courtroom 2B were filled with neighbors, churchgoers, a few reporters from the county paper, and those who remembered Marcus Hale from years ago. Some came out of loyalty, others out of curiosity, but all carried the quiet hum of anticipation that hung over the wood-paneled room. Silas Carter sat at the front table, his broad shoulders filling the space of the chair. His army jacket replaced by a plain dark suit that bore the stiffness of long disuse. His face, lined and solemn, betrayed neither fear nor confidence, only the steadiness of a man who had already seen worse and survived. Beside him sat Rachel Monroe, her curls pinned back neatly, her navy trench folded over the chair, a stack of legal documents spread before her. She radiated calm resolve, her freckled face serious but not severe, the kind of lawyer who steadied others simply by refusing to waver. At Silas's feet lay Valor, head down but eyes sharp, the shepherd's presence drawing murmurs from those seated nearby. To the right, Evan sat on a booster cushion, so his eyes cleared the table. His small frame was hidden under a navy coat, but the photograph remained tucked beneath his arm. He chewed his lip nervously, his pale face softened only by the hand Valor occasionally pressed against his knee. The side door opened with a hush, and Monica Harrington entered. She was striking as ever-blonde hair coiled into a tight bun, a charcoal suit accented with a crimson silk scarf, diamond studs catching the light. Her movements carried the precision of someone used to walking into rooms and commanding them. At her side was Douglas Remick, a private attorney known for sharp tactics and sharper billing. In his early 50s, Remick was barrel-chested, his beard trimmed, his eyes calculating even as his mouth shaped a reassuring smile toward his client. When Judge Karen Langley stepped in, the room settled. She was a black woman in her late 40s, robed in black but wearing beneath it a royal blue blouse that hinted at her unshaken individuality. Her graying curls were pulled back, her glasses perched low, and her eyes, keen and probing, swept the room as if measuring not only the evidence, but the weight of every person present. She was known as fair but relentless, a judge who prized truth over performance. Court is now in session, she began. We are here to review the petition for guardianship of one Evan Hale, currently under the care of Mr. Silas Carter. Rachel rose, stating clearly that Silas had assumed temporary guardianship after rescuing Evan from abandonment, and that they now presented evidence that Monica Harrington had acted with negligence and fraud. Remick countered quickly, voice smooth as he argued that Monica had been Evan's appointed guardian after his mother left, and that she had only ever acted in his best interest. Judge Langley gestured for the evidence. Rachel submitted the USB, and the screen behind the bench flickered to life. The grainy footage played, showing Monica's SUV sliding into frame, the door opening, and Evan stumbling out into the storm. The courtroom went silent as Monica bent low, whispered into his ear, shoved the photograph into his arms, and walked away. Then the audio filtered through. Stay quiet. If they think you're crazy, they'll never give you what's his. A gasp rippled across the benches. Evan's small hand clutched Valor's fur tighter. Monica's face remained practiced, though a muscle in her jaw flickered. Remick stood quickly, objecting that the footage was taken out of context, that Evan had been delivered to a safe place, not abandoned. But Rachel countered, her voice sharp. Safe places are not cemetery gates in the middle of a snowstorm. Next, Rachel laid Marcus Hale's handwritten letter before the judge. The words were simple but damning. If anything happens, don't let her near my boy. She'll twist the truth to get what she wants. Judge Langley read it twice, her lips pressed tight. Then she looked up, eyes settling on Evan. Son, would you like to say something? Only if you want to. The boy shifted. His legs swung nervously beneath the chair. Then slowly, he stood, clutching the photograph in both hands. His voice was small, but it carried across the chamber. People keep saying I'm broken, that I make things up. But I remember, Mama left me there. And Miss Monica told me not to talk, because no one would believe me. His voice wavered, but he straightened his back. Mr. Silas didn't say I was broken. He gave me his coat. He gave me oatmeal. He let me sleep next to Valor. Valor didn't leave me when I cried. As if on cue, Valor lifted his head, eyes fixed on the bench. Judge Langley's gaze softened, the silence so deep that the creak of wood could be heard. Monica shifted in her chair, her painted composure cracking. Then she leaned forward, voice dripping with a controlled sweetness. Your Honor, I love that child as if he were my own. At that moment, Valor stood abruptly and barked loud, sharp, deliberate. The sound cracked through the chamber like a gavel of its own. Everyone froze. Evan pressed closer to him, relief washing his face. The judge tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, then set down her pen. In light of the evidence and testimony presented, Judge Langley said firmly, this court finds Monica Harrington guilty of neglect and fraud in her claim to guardianship. Effective immediately, all custodial rights are revoked. Legal and physical custody of Evan Hale is granted to Mr. Silas Carter. The room murmured. Rachel exhaled, her hand resting briefly on Silas's arm. Evan's eyes widened, then turned toward Silas with a look both disbelieving and desperate. Does that mean I can stay? Silas's voice, roughened by years of command, softened in reply. You're home now, son. That afternoon, the storm finally broke, sunlight piercing through the clouds like a reluctant promise. At the cabin, Silas hammered 2 nails into the cedar post near the gate, hanging a wooden sign he had carved by hand. Valor's home, where broken hearts mend. The wood was simple, but its words were steady. Inside, Mary Briggs had stopped by with soup. Rachel lingered near the fire, reviewing papers, and Evan sat cross-legged on the rug, with Valor pressed against him. The boy ran a hand through the shepherd's graying fur, then rose suddenly, running to Silas where he stood at the door. He threw his arms around his waist. I've got a family now, Evan whispered, his voice muffled against Silas's chest. I'm Evan Carter Hale. Silas wrapped an arm around the boy, the other resting on Valor's head. The shepherd wagged his tail once, a steady beat against the floor. For the first time in years, Silas allowed himself to smile, not the forced kind, but the quiet, certain kind of a man who had found a reason to keep going. The courthouse walls may have held the echoes of judgment that day, but what truly mattered was the sound of healing a boy who chose a new name, a man who chose to be a father, and a dog who never stopped believing in loyalty. In Ashwood, broken hearts didn't just find justice. They found a home. And maybe in your own life, you've seen how love can arrive when you least expect it, through a stranger's kindness, through a child's courage, or through a faithful companion who refuses to let go. Do you believe every soul deserves a second chance at family? If you do, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like this video and follow our channel for more stories of hope, faith, and redemption.